Hi, good afternoon, Saints. I have two book reviews here by that expose the Seventh Day Adventist Church. If you're maybe wondering like what resources I could have in book form that expose the Seventh Day Adventist Church, I have two good ones here, and I'm just gonna do some quick book reviews on this. A lot of evangelicals have the impression um, that the Seventh day Adventist Church is somehow evangelical when it actually isn't. The general belief goes that, like, a lot of evangelicals just think that, well, the general belief is that a lot of evangelicals have is that the Seventh day Adventists are just another Christian denomination and they just worship just on a different day, which is the Saturday, the quote unquote Sabbath. But when you start looking more deep into their teachings, you start to realize that they're not really evangelical whatsoever. Now, there are doctrines that the SDA Church believes that are biblical, such as they are Trinitarians. They believe in the deity of Jesus Christ, his virgin birth, his resurrection. So that you do find core fundamental doctrines even within their statement of faith, which is the 28 fundamental beliefs. Um, so there are things that are biblical that the SDA Church holds to, um, but there are a lot of false teachings also. They believe in soul sleep. They deny the immortality of the soul. They believe that hell is not really eternal, an eternal punishment, but more of just annihilation. Uh, they teach work salvation. They mix law and grace. So, I mean, those are just some of the stuff that they believe. They don't believe in a rapture, so they hold to a no rapture theory, and they reject the biblical doctrine of the rapture of the church. Um, they don't believe in a judgment seat of Christ because they believe in the investigative judgment. So, I mean, there's just so many doctrines that they hold to that are not biblical, and they favor more their teachings. But if you're a believer in evangelical and you want to get some good resources to kind of get you to better understand their teachings and what the church actually truly teaches, I have two good books. These are from my library that I have. That way you can get pretty much arm yourself with the knowledge of their teachings, what now, you don't have to understand the complexities of what their teachings are, but just get a good overview of just the basics of what they believe. And where I live, there's not a in my county. There's only two Adventist churches. There's an English and a Spanish. But since I live in Northern California, there is a strong Adventist presence even here in Northern California. Um, since I live near the church where Doug Batchelor preaches, not too far from where I live. If you don't know who that is, he's a well-known Adventist pastor and within the denomination. I'm pretty close to the Amazing Facts publishing house that puts out the Amazing Facts, which is the Amazing Facts Ministries from their denomination. Actually, about like maybe 40 minutes from where I live, so it's not too far. So there's a strong Adventist presence, but I have not really encountered too much Adventists where I live. It's just not very common to see an SDA around here. So like I said, there's only two in our county, but it's good to have the knowledge of what they believe. Um, the SDA Church is not evangelical. They deny core doctrines of our faith that are biblical in favor of their church teachings. But I'm just going to do two quick book reviews on these two. These are great resources. Highly recommend these. You can get both of these on Amazon.com. The Amazon. You can get them both. I have this one. So the first one I have here is by Dale Ratzlaff, an evangelical resource and an appeal to Adventists, cultic doctrine of Seventh-day Adventists. This is the older version. He has the updated version. It's has a different cover and everything. And he has a website. I think it's called sabbathinchrist.org, something like that. And he has other books, a couple other books, not a whole lot, but a couple other ones defending some biblical doctrines. And his books mainly deal with like refuting Adventist teachings. If you don't know who Dale Ratzlaff is, he was a former Adventist pastor, and he was like a fourth generation pastor. He eventually came to the conclusion after studying the Bible that what the Adventist Church believes is actually false, and he did that when he started putting away the all Adventist books, including the Ellen G. White books and all that, and just focused on the Bible. And he started to see something radically different in the scriptures than what the church was teaching him, and that led him eventually to leave the Adventist Church and just follow the Bible alone. And if you go on my playlist on biblical documentaries, you can see an interview of him by another believer from the Christian Answers Ministries, and he kind of gives his testimony of how he left the Adventist Church and came to the truth of Scripture. So it's a very good book. It's maybe like let me see here. It's like about maybe 300-page book around there. Yeah, 383 right there. So about almost close to 400 page book. And some of these are pastors of what they say about the book. So it's a very good book. He exposes SDA doctrine. And I really like when evangelicals who were former Adventists, you really get to, I like that because they know really how the church functions and how the church is and what they teach, as opposed to a believer who doesn't really know the doctrine or never grew up SDA, doesn't really know as much. So these guys who come out of these churches and come to Christ, they really know the church, how it is, and that's a picture of him and his wife. So it's a very good book. I'm not going to go through the entire book, but he gives you the context. So he pretty much touches on what the Adventist Church teaches theologically, and he gives a bit of his experience in the church when he used to be an Adventist. So he shows you biblically where they're wrong, exposing their doctrines, but he also shares his own life experiences, what he used to be before he was an Adventist. And then he also he has appendix sections, like fundamental beliefs of SDAs, questionable statements by Ellen G. White. It's an interesting section because he gives Ellen G. White's quotes that are going contrary to Scripture. I mean, just strange views of the woman Ellen G. White. Ellen G. White is very much revered within the Adventist Church, especially if they're more on the traditional side, because there are some SDA churches that don't really hold her writings to a high view. But if they're conservative, they definitely do. And then he gives you some select bibliographies, but it's a very, very good book. Very interesting read too. I like how he gives some of his own examples and his own stories of how he did that, came about, and showing you where they're wrong. And he gives you the history, like some background history of how the Adventist Church came about and all that stuff. So that way you kind of get to know as an outsider what Adventists believe. Very, very good book. Highly recommend this book as well as his other books. You can get his other books, so that's a good one. And this one is by D.M. Canwright, and it's put out by the Gospel Advocate. I think this is a Church of Christ publisher, but nevertheless, it's still a good book. And D.M. Canwright, Dudley Marvin Canwright, he passed away a long time ago. He passed away back in 1914, but he wrote this very famous work. He wrote a couple other books, He wrote one defending Sunday observance, and then he wrote another one on the life of Miss Ellen G. White. So D.M. Canright, if you don't know who that is, D.M. Canright, for the longest time, was an actual Seventh-day Adventist. He was in the denomination, the church, for 28 years. And in fact, it was said of D.M. Canright that he was a very, very good debater. Very good debater. He was like a pillar within the Adventist denomination at the time. And he knew Ellen G. White very well. I think he was one of his secretaries, so he wrote a book on her, and pretty much he exposes her. And Ellen G. White was not consistent in her beliefs. She may have said these things here and there, but she was not consistent whatsoever in her beliefs. She was against meat eating because she followed the dietary laws of the Old Testament Mosaic law. But, within closed doors, she would have oysters and eat meats, eat chicken, things like that, eggs. So she wasn't consistent with her views. And he exposes her in that book and also shows her life and what it was like working with her. But he was like I said, he was an Adventist for 28 years. And eventually he came to reject the teachings. In fact, he wrote a book when he was an Adventist defending the Sabbath keeping. But years later, he came to renounce Seventh-day, as you could see, Seventh-day Adventism renounced. He renounced it because of the false teachings. He came to just read the Bible, and that led him away from the church, just like Dale Ratzlaff did. And to this day, D.M. Canright is maligned by SDAs. SDAs don't like D.M. Canright. And what you'll often hear from some SDAs is that SDAs will like claim that pretty much that he never that he eventually went back to the Adventist church. And that's one of the views of the SDAs, is that he eventually recanted his position and went back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but that's actually false. D.M. Canright never recanted his position. He held strongly against Sabbath keeping because he believed it was not for the Christian today, but it was an Old Testament Mosaic law thing. So when D.M. Canright left the Seventh-day Adventist Church, he became a Methodist and eventually left the Methodist Church, and he became a Baptist pastor. So he remained a Baptist pastor till his death in 1914, I believe. Yeah, so around there. But he never recounted his position, and I'm just going to read you his book, as you can see here, it says, after an experience of 28 years by a prominent minister and writer of that faith. So D.M. Canright knew what he was talking about. So this is not some guy, just some random guy, just saying things about the Adventist church. No, this is a former insider of the SDA church. This is a drawing of him. That's his writing right there. That's D.M. Canright. So I want to read you this publisher's note. Very interesting. It says, D.M. Canright died at Grand Rapids, Michigan, May 12, 1919. Sorry, I said 1914. So that's my mistake. In his 80th year. Soon after his death, his daughter wrote O.E. Payne, Hannah, Alta Canada, quote, Father was more firm in his conviction of the error of their teaching the longer he lived, in spite of Adventist claims that he repudiated his writings against them. I tell you in this anticipation of your having such falsehoods to meet, quoted by Mr. Payne in the Christian Standard, October 16, 1920. The publisher is glad to pass this information on to the defenders of the truth against the errors of Adventism. It will answer the oft-repeated but wholly false claim that Mr. Canright repudiated his writings against Adventism before he died. Again, the publisher is gratified to be able to give to the public a book of such value that although it has not been out of print a long time, yet it has sold at a premium. It has been so scarce that it was hardly available at any price. If this volume serves to rescue one soul from the meshes of Adventism, the publisher will be repaid. BC Good Pasture. So that's a common belief, as I said. The Advent, if you bring about D.M. Canright to an Adventist, if they know anything about D.M. Canright, they might tell you that D.M. Canright refuted his position and eventually went back to the SDA Church. Do not fall for that lie. That's not true. D.M. Canright never recanted his position till his death. D.M. Canright, written by his own daughter, in that quote, D.M. Canright rejected Adventism even to his death because it wasn't just his views. He rejected it because the Bible rejected Sabbath keeping in our dispensation. But he did not recant his position, and he never went back to the SDA Church. That's just a lie from Adventists to tell you that. I've even heard Adventists say, some pastors say that D.M. Canright wasn't saved because he left the Adventist Church. I mean, I just think that's just nonsense. And he gives some testimonials from others. These testimonials are old testimonials. They're nothing new. They're testimonials that were written by D.M. Canright from other believers from different churches of what they thought the book at the time, what they thought about it. A lot of good praises from different publishers, magazines, things like that, even pastors, churches that just praise the work. A very good book. This book is pretty thick in length. It's 430 pages, but it's very, very, very good and meaty. It's like the other one, just like this one. But this one it's a much older book, obviously. So he has some preface. And I mean, the book, he just absolutely just shreds Adventism to pieces. Absolutely just shreds it. Being a former Adventist himself, he just shreds. He goes through every argument that you can think of what Adventists will come up with. And he shows you biblically from scripture after scripture, refuting their teaching scripturally. And he gives some examples of his own life, but he just goes through, these are the chapters, and you can see the titles of the chapters, what it's like. Like, he even has a section here, where is it? Like, just stuff you that the Adventists will use against, you, like why Christians keep Sunday. Did the Pope change the Sabbath? That's a very common argument of SDA. Sabbatarian positions on the history of Sunday refuted. Very common held belief by Adventists is that that the Sunday is the mark of the beast, and all believers who worship on a Sunday are receiving the mark of the beast, and so on and so forth. And he refutes those arguments. So every argument that Adventists come up with, he refutes it biblically, and he shows you historically as well by quoting early church fathers' position, even some reformers refuting Adventist common Adventist beliefs, especially on the Sabbath. Like, you have the Sabbath in the Old Testament, the Sabbath in the New Testament, the Jewish Sabbath abolished, a history of numerous efforts to revive the Jewish Sabbath all fail. And in this section, it's interesting because he quotes reformers, some reformers who were actually strongly against Adventism. And he shows you, like, at the Reformation, why not found out before? Efforts to revive the Sabbath fail at the Reformation in England, Seventh-day Baptists, Adventist efforts as a test, and it fails. There are new lights, quote-unquote, opposed by Luther, Baxter, Bunyan, Roger. These are all reformers, and they strongly were opposed to Sabbath keeping. The law, the Decalogue examined. So it has 22 chapters, and you have some appendix section at the end. The two covenants. We have the two covenants, the Old Covenant versus New Covenant. Will our Christians under 47 prominent texts used by Sabbatarians examined the nature. I mean, he just goes through church history. So you get a good meaty book on refutations of Adventist teachings. He quotes from Scripture. He quotes from early church fathers. He quotes even from reformers. Um, any argument, like I said, you can think of, he refutes it biblically and just shreds their doctrines biblically. Very good book. And a man that was coming out of Adventism, he knows what he's dealing with. He knows what he's dealing with. So highly recommend it. I'm not going to go through the, through the pages, but so like we have a section here, why Christians keep Sunday, and he gives, you can see he's quoting from different people, and he even gives you the page number where you can find their works. See 15th century AD 1409, 14th century AD 1359. So he gives you a lot of historical. He knew what he was talking about. He's not some guy that just doesn't know what he's talking about. So don't be fooled by Adventists to claim that D.M. Canwright was renounced his position and went back to the SDA Church. That is false. He never did. He remained a Baptist pastor till his death in 1919. Very, very good book. Highly recommend these two resources. These will be very, very good for your library. If you live in an area where there's a lot of Adventists, and Adventists do evangelize, so keep that in mind. They're very similar to Mormons and Jehovah's Witness. You may not see them as often like you would see Mormons or JWs, but they do evangelize. They are notorious for literature evangelism. If you don't know what they do, is they sell books. They go from door to door canvassing, and they sell their books, their literature. And one of the ways they hook people, one of the ways they hook people into their denomination is by selling you books. So they sell books. So the way they do it is very sneaky, because I've seen videos on here on YouTube by SDA evangelists and how they do evangelism, and it's just very, very sneaky. They will come to you in very, very harmless way, innocent. You would not think of anything, and they would sell you their literature. They may come to you with a cookbook, because one thing to remember is that SDAs not only preach their false gospel, but they also preach another false gospel, the health message, because they believe that they're not only supposed to preach the gospel of Christ, but they also believe in the health message, that the message of the Bible also teaches the health. And obviously that's not biblical. Now, there's nothing wrong with eating healthy, but that's not the message of the Bible. The message of the Bible is the cross. It's the cross of Christ. But they will lure in people with innocent books that way, with a health book. They may sell them a health book. And then eventually, if they see that they're interested and the person starts buying, let's say, 2 books on health, then they will come to you, that now that they see that you bought, for say, 2 books on cooking, now they will sell you their books on their teachings, now on their church. They may sell you the Great Controversy book, which is a very, very common book by Adventists, very common book that they go around and sell pretty much. And then the person starts to read that, oh, I like that very much. So they start reading, and that's eventually starts luring them into the denomination. Once they see that you're interested, they may come to you again and give you Bible studies, and then that's how they lure you into the denomination. It's very, very, very sneaky, the way it's done. Very, very sneaky, because I've seen some of their tactics on YouTube, how they reach people. It's very, very sneaky. Just be careful with their teachings, but these books will arm you in their teachings. That way you get a knowing, grow your knowledge of Seventh-day Adventism and what they actually teach. These 2 books, if you want any books on Adventism, I highly recommend you these 2. You don't need really anything else other than just these 2. These 2 books are like enough to ground you and know you what Adventists believe. Both of these guys were former Adventists, just keep that in mind. So they know their material, they know what they're talking about. They're not some outsider like any other evangelical who's going in and kind of discovering what they teach. But these guys were former insiders, knowing what they teach, what the church is like, how they go about it, how they lure in other people into their denomination. Like I said, I live in an area where not very Advent. I have encountered a few Adventists, but it's extremely rare where I live. Even though I live in a high area where Northern California is very, very big on Adventism, you may have more interaction with Adventists in your area, but it's always good to know what they teach, because a lot of believers are under the assumption that they're just another evangelical denomination when they are not. The SDA church is a false church, and it should not be viewed as evangelical. Now, we should not obviously hate Adventists. We don't hate Adventists. We want them to come onto the knowledge of the truth. We love Adventists. We should love them, respect them, be kind to them, but also know what they teach so we can engage them, if we do engage them, and give them the gospel of grace, also known as the gospel of Jesus Christ. A lot of Adventists don't know what grace is. They've been shrouded because it's all about law keeping with them. They don't understand the difference between law and grace. Two clear distinctions in Scripture. Law and grace do not mix, they're opposites. Two dispensations. You have the Jewish dispensation before Acts 2, and then you have the Christian dispensation from Acts 2 to the rapture. We're living under that dispensation. But a lot of Adventists do not understand grace. They think they have to earn grace through works. So, very good books to arm yourself with. Get these books. I do not remember the price. I can't really tell you as far as price. You may spend maybe $40 with these two. I don't know, but maybe you can get them cheaper. I got these used, so this one's used. This one, I don't think you can get this one used. You have to buy it new by the publisher. I think it was like $20, but it was well worth the investment. So next time you encounter Adventists, now you know what are arguments they're going to come against you, and you can arm yourself better with their these teachings by these guys. It's another side note. Keep in mind, when you encounter Adventists, don't assume automatically that every Adventist is not saved, because remember that some Adventists were former evangelicals, and they're most likely saved. Could be that they're saved. They were former Adventists, but that were lured into the denomination, the church, and they became SDAs after that. So keep that in mind, that you may encounter an Adventist who was a former evangelical, who maybe was a former Presbyterian, was a former Baptist, was a former non-denominational Christian, so on and so forth. So keep that in mind when you encounter Adventists, that you may encounter believers who are saved, but they're just in a false church. Don't automatically assume that all SDAs are unsaved. Keep in mind of that. Some of them are saved, they're just in a false church. And like I said, some of them were former evangelicals, but were lured into the denomination. So keep that in mind. It's very important. So thank you for watching, and God bless you.